Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here, and I just wanted to give a quick announcement that I will be attending GDC this year, presenting a roundtable called Aligning Marketing with Players' In-Game Experience. So if you are attending the conference this year, love for you to check out that roundtable. It's a really important discussion that we all should be having. So would love to see you there. And if for whatever reason you're unable to attend to that, please reach out. I'd love to connect with you. And the best way to do that is to either shoot me an email, andrew@rengenmarketing.com, or you can go to my website, rengenmarketing.com, and just click on the Let's Chat button in the nav and fill out the form. So again, if you're attending GDC this year, I'd love to see you in one way or another. Let's connect. Let's go to have that discussion in the roundtable. And if you're not, by all means, I'd love to carry on that conversation from GDC with you and how it pertains to you directly. Because like I said, it's a very important one I think we all need to have. So thank you so much for being such great listeners. Would love to see you at GDC, or would love just to connect with you regardless if you're attending or not. All right, that's all I got today. Let's get to the show. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of IndieGame Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 267, where we're going to be talking about, are you learning fast enough with your marketing? While a majority of us know the importance of marketing your game, sometimes how fast you can learn from your marketing efforts is just as, if not more important than doing the marketing itself. In today's discussion, I share the importance of why you should take a fast approach with your marketing and ways to go about doing it so you can learn quickly and save yourself from potentially costly mistakes down the road. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on IndieGame Movement. Hey everybody, thanks again for joining me today. And as I mentioned, this is just going to be a different type of conversation show with me today. And the topic we're going to be discussing is, are you learning fast enough with your marketing? Now, I wanted to provide some quick context here. So recently I had a conversation with a friend, and we were just catching up and talking about his studio and things along that lines. And as we were having this conversation, throughout part of it, he briefly mentioned the importance of learning fast. And that it really stood out to me because I know this importance too, but sometimes I think it eludes us because we just get so caught up with everything else, or we don't necessarily know of what are ways that we could learn things faster. Because a lot of times we kind of have the idea of that, like, haste makes waste or whatever. But at the same time, learning fast, especially if you're learning fast and effectively, it can save you a lot of trouble. So that's kind of the approach that I wanted to take here with this episode, and some things that I wanted to cover, just so you have a clear understanding of what the show is going to be about, this particular episode, is first and foremost, I'm really looking at this from a more strategic approach opposed to like a tactically one. So for example, kind of going over the importance of the reasons why you would do some of these things and how to look at things differently, opposed to, hey, what's the best way to create a TikTok video that's going to go viral, right? Very tactically focused, where the latter is more of a high level. So of the things we're going to be talking about today, it's going to be why you should kind of learn things fast, when you should, how to prepare and be ready, different ways to learn fast, how to do it, and then last but not least, what to look for when you're learning fast. So I'm just going to get right into it, right from the top, and address the question, why should you learn fast, right? And as I mentioned, like, a lot of people out there might think, and I'm one of them, where haste makes waste, right? But the reality of it is, when you're dedicating so much time and energy into such a big and demanding project, it's really important to know what things are going to be effective, what is not going to be effective. Because And also by learning fast, or some of the reasons why you should is because if you don't learn quickly right away, you can realize that your direction in things could be so far off that you might not realize it until it's too late. Meaning, like, if you don't know of certain activities that you're doing or promotional stuff, or basically if your marketing is sending the wrong signals and everything else like that, you might not know until much later down the road where you're like, wow, I don't know how this is going to do now. And I kind of wish I knew this type of activity first. And the other reason why is because if you're not necessarily investing in ways of trying to figure out things pretty quickly or fast, having a process or a means to learn things very drawn out, again, it can cost you time and money and resources. Because if you're, it really comes down to, is the process or is what you're doing at the rate you're doing really giving you enough information in a timely manner that's helping you make effective decisions. So that's why learning fast is really important, at least within the context that I'm presenting it, because if you don't have that information, you could be making decisions that aren't going to be the most effective or impactful, or could have negative impacts on what you're doing in the long run with your project, with your game. So that's the main reason why you should learn fast, is because it can offer you a lot of insight very quickly, so you can quickly adapt on the go, opposed to trying to adapt when you're too far down the road. And sometimes you just can't, because so many other things are already set in motion, and it doesn't give you the flexibility that you could have had earlier on during development. All right, so now to the next topic is, when should you start learning fast? Now, I like to associate this particular topic with another one that a lot of people always have the question is, like, essentially, when should you start marketing? And my take on this is really just as early as possible. So if you have anything about the game and that you can share, just get out there and do it. And the main reason is because if you're not, that just creates one less opportunity of people to know that you're out there, that you exist and everything. Some people are in the mindset of, hey, I don't want to show my game if it, let's be blunt, in a really crappy state. Because then they might get the wrong idea, they might not see the same vision that we have for the project, and therefore just won't come back to it or anything like that. And I understand where they're coming from. It makes complete sense. But in terms of just generally marketing, get yourself out there as soon as possible, and also set those expectations. If it's in a crappy state, let people know. Be very clear about that. Because otherwise you're still not taking action and people don't know that you're out there, essentially, right? But in the context of this conversation about learning fast with your marketing, or are you learning fast enough? I would take the approach of, especially when we'll get into this a little bit more, if you're taking approaches like using money to fund some of these campaigns or projects to learn fast, I would rather have people have something that's a little bit more solid or further along with development than something that's super early concept stages and things like that. That's just my take on it. But again, and the way I approach this too is, as long as you have something that can properly visually represent the game, even if there's still polish or other things that need to be updated, as long as visually players or people or your audience that can get a clear sense or a pretty good sense of what to expect from the final project, that's going to be the time that you really want to start learning fast. I know it's very relative and dynamic in that sense, but what I'm basically saying in comparison to when you should start marketing is not something so early that people can't get a clear idea of what your game's about. So that and that's basically how I feel when you should start learning fast. And and we'll get into some more specifics here, but when I'm saying like learning fast and stuff, it's about trying different things, like trying things on different channels, trying things with your social media outreach, trying things with like influencer outreach and those types of things, right? These are all areas where we're looking to get or essentially create more awareness for the game. And so I think that context helps to kind of guide you in terms of when you should start doing these types of activities with the mindset of learning fast. Because, again, if it's just early concept and you don't really have anything to share, why would you go to an event? And trust me, I have seen people go to events where they had barely anything. And it was kind of upsetting for me from a player perspective, because I'm here playing this. I'm like, I have no idea what this is. It's just a bunch of blocks that are moving around in a 3D environment, and I move and I can like engage with them, but not really. I'm just walking around exploring, and I find myself asking all these questions. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do that. Oh yeah, we're gonna do that." I'm like, well, or it's like, what is this? Oh, it's supposed to be this and this and this, and I'm like, there's no way I would have been able to ever figure that out on my own. And that's just a quick example of it being too early. So I hope you understand where I'm coming from in terms of when is a good time to start this process that I'm referring to as learning fast. Is basically when you have something that can clearly convey the state that the game is going to be, so the expectations are properly set, I should say. So now in the next subject, I want to go into how to be prepared and ready to get into this idea of, hey, let's learn some information really quickly. A few things I want to make point on here is that sometimes when people get this idea of, hey, look, TikTok's doing awesome, I want to go out and just tackle this, and perhaps maybe I can get some of that viral activity that I've seen other people get, right? And then they just go out there and do it. Even with some of the processes and guides out there that they can reference, they're super helpful. But even with that, I think it's important to go in with a little bit better of a plan. But there's a caveat to that too, right? So, and it's two-sided. One is, okay, let's say you have an idea, you have kind of like a guide or a step-by-step process you can follow to kind of do these things. Or you talk to a friend who's done it and they're familiar with the process, they're sharing it with you. Well, first and foremost, everybody's approach and whatever is going to be different than someone else's, because your game is going to be different than someone else's, even if it's very similar. So there's that in mind. And then the aspect of, if you just go out and do it, that's almost like, in a way, in a very small way, a little bit better, because then at least that concept and method of just taking something like throwing out a TikTok video and doing it, that's taking action, and that is a really quick and fast way to learn what's going to work, what's not going to work, right? Now, sometimes you'll find really quickly that doing that, just implementing, not putting much thought behind it, and putting it together, you're not going to get much results. And if you keep doing that several times and you see nothing, you're like, okay, it's not working, I'm going to pass off. And that's not necessarily the right way to approach it, because you might not have put in the full effort or have a complete understanding of things outside of the context of what you learned about that particular activity. Like the example I'm using here is TikTok. And then you just brush it off and you're like, yep, it doesn't work for us, so we're going to move on to the next thing type situation. But there wasn't any plan or real place other than your understanding of talking to people or just reading some articles about it, right? Now, on the flip side, there's the planning thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to like really think hard about the type of asset or the clip that I'm going to use to market this, and kind of my approach, and what's my messaging going to be, and how's it going to align with the audience, and all this stuff, right? But then if you're focusing too much on all that stuff, all you're doing is just doing kind of busy work, and it might feel good that you're like, okay, I'm being really decisive about how I can do this, and we're going to take this approach and everything else. But if you're not implementing, then basically you're not going to get any results. So there's an extreme to either side. If you're just doing nothing but planning and not implementing, well, you're not going to get anything. If you just skip the whole planning process and just implement, well, yeah, you're going to get results, but you might not be making all the right decisions with that implementation, and you'll get some results, but not very many. Um, and I don't know. In some ways, I feel that like both of the extremes can be pretty bad, but the last one could be where you think it's not going to work, but because you didn't take the necessary steps or plan out a process or something, you could be missing out on that opportunity because you didn't properly vet it. So, so how to be prepared, right? So I would say is basically kind of find that common ground between it. Like take some time and don't go about it like shyly or without much commitment. Take some time to plan things out, and then take some time to actually implement and learn. And basically what I'm saying when you're planning, develop a process. Like say, hey, we're going to use this type of image. We're going to post around this type of time, and we're going to like something like that. So you have a step-by-step process you outlined, and then you post wherever you're posting or whatever the activity, the action is. You see what the results are, and you're like, okay, if we change this part, step 1 of the process, or step 3, like we use a different image this time, or whatever it might be, then at least you can go in with a proper way to monitor those things. And you can do those processes, make another post activity, and make that same type of activity with maybe some slight changes or variations a few times or several times, and then make a change to that. And then that's basically an optimization process that's going to be really helpful in identifying what's going to work better or not. Now, I kind of jumped ahead with the last one there, but another area that I think is really important and to even get you more prepared is to find marketing gold. Now, I say marketing gold, I'm actually referencing a blog post I wrote a few weeks ago, which is basically, and a much shorter way of saying it is really know your audience. And there's a few ways you can do that. The article really goes into detail about how you can do that, but essentially it comes down to this. For example, if you already launched in like something like early access, or you're getting a lot of feedback from play testers or things like that, you can get people's feedback on or their reviews and saying like what they don't like. And essentially what you're looking for is pain points or what fulfills them. So what of your game is fulfilling them, and what of your game is a pain point for them, like what they don't like or whatever, or what they really like. And let's say if your game is in a state where people can play it, provide feedback or reviews, then the next best thing you could possibly do is look at other titles that are very similar to yours and check out those, like Steam reviews, for example, or ask questions on Reddit if there's a Reddit community around them. And basically what's really good about this is looking for the pain points or fulfillment points is looking at it with the lens with, hey, does your game address this? If people are saying a lot of negative stuff, for example, or mentioning a lot of things that are like, I really wish this game did this, and you're seeing a commonality within a title or within the genre itself, and you know that your game addresses that pain point that people have, well, boom, that's like a nugget of marketing gold. Use that as leverage to really address to things when you're putting out, whether it's social media or ads or anything along those lines in your messaging, that call out to those things that people as a whole are really looking for, are really wishing that they see in the game. Or on the other side is like things that fulfill them. I love this element of this game. I love what they do here with the whatever it is, the mechanic, the atmosphere, I don't know, like any number of things, and call out to those things. Because that's what's really going to get people's attention. That's what's really going to get them standing out, help you stand out more, right? And that's another way of being prepared. It's not just like having the process, but making sure you're approaching it the right way, that you know your audience and that you're finding the things that kind of like make them tick. If they're calling out to these things and you can address those things, meaning pain points or the areas that would fulfill them, and you can address those areas for them, then you're just going to be putting yourself in a much better position than someone else who's just trying to use a tactical idea behind something. So that's what I would say is how to prepare. Not just plan out the process a little bit and implement on that process, but also know as much as you can about your audience and finding that marketing gold. Because if you combine those three things together, I'm sure you're going to find pretty quickly what's going to work and what's didn't. And you're going to be more confident about the decisions you make too. And know that, hey, look, we can grow and build upon this. So different ways to learn fast. This is where I'm going to get a little bit more specifically about all this, me saying learning fast. Like, what does it mean? And I know I gave some examples, but here are some others. So there's two different ways that I'm kind of breaking this down here. One is organic, and then one is paid. And there's actually a lot of overlap between the two, but you'll see why it completely makes sense in a moment. So for organic, I'm primarily talking about organic or manually working on content distribution. So that means if you're getting screenshots or GIFs or clips of your game, any visual media, essentially. It could be text too, but for the most part, it's primarily going to be visual. Distributing that content and where. Like, so basically it could be social media. It could be through influencers. It could be through play testers. There's lots of different areas that you would do that. And organic is basically, like I said, a manual process in which you're marketing your game, sharing the content, distributing that content. And then on the other side is paid. And that comes down in the forms of like paid advertising. And I'm speaking very broadly here with paid. And again, like I said before, it overlaps in a lot of ways with the organic stuff, right? So like paid advertising one, and paid advertising, lots of social media platforms have paid advertising. So that's one way to go. And then events, participating in events, usually in a lot of cases, you have to pay for those events, right? And then influencers, you can do a little bit more with influencers if you pay for them, or not necessarily do more, but get more, I should say. You could get more awareness because of going through means of paid. You can have more control in terms of when, like you can have a say in when that content gets covered and goes live. So, and those are just some examples of the different ways to learn fast. But how to learn fast with each one, I'm going to break down to that in a moment, because clearly on a paid strategy, that's pretty straightforward. If you have money, you get that extra exposure and you can learn pretty quickly. But organic, it's like, well, if it's manual, so what does that mean, right? So let's just get into those ways now. So with organic, what it really comes down to, if you want to really quickly learn fast, is it requires a lot of action, and I would say commitment from you. So this is, I think, the toughest one for people. And obviously, we're always kind of caught in a rock and a hard place, so to speak, where meaning like, hey, if I have to put in all this effort and time and everything into doing an organic thing, well, then it's taken away from development and everything, right? And then paid is like, well, if I don't have the money or allocated the resources to do it, then I don't have that either. So this is the part where I think a lot of us face that's most challenging, because I don't have the experience, I don't have the resources or whatever it is, looking at the ways of doing it. Now, what I want to present here, though, is just a different way of looking how to do these things. Because, again, it's with this whole mindset of if we do these things quickly and have a means or process to do it effectively, then it shouldn't have too much of an impact or concern you too much. It shouldn't, I mean, this is just my own perspective, and I know it's different from everybody's. But it shouldn't cause you or feel that it should be a concern at all. It's just looking at things with a different mindset and understanding the importance of these things and why they're important. Because, again, it could save you from going completely off in a different direction and then finding out at that point in time it's too late to change or adapt. So let's get into organic. So I mentioned there, it's requiring a lot of action and commitment. And what I would say to this is, regardless of what your schedule is or how you're allocating your time to doing, let's say if you're doing a 25 to 75 marketing to development, or 50-50, whatever you can, anything within under 50, or as close to 50 as possible, I think is ideal. And I know it's not realistic all the time, and there's lots of reasons for those things, of course. But the closest you can for that is great. And what I would do from a learning fast perspective is taking a moment of time, and let's say it could be a week or 2 weeks of development, to really focus hard on marketing for a moment, or testing something out. And it doesn't mean, I mean, if you're a solo dev, then yeah, it does mean it's 100% of your time, and that can be rough to give up. Where if you especially have a limited amount of time, that that would be tough to devote to just marketing. But hear me out here, and I know the solo dev scenario is kind of one extreme, like the biggest extreme, I guess, in a way. But hear me out. If you just simply devote 100% of your time, where you spent like a little bit of time coming up with the process, you have an idea of what you want to try that you think is going to be really impactful. You don't want to try this with everything, right? You only want to focus on the stuff that you think is going to be the most impactful, or other people have seemed to have the most impact in terms of creating results or awareness for your game. And by focusing on that, creating a little bit of a plan, understanding, making sure you have a clear understanding of your audience, and then implementing these things. And let's say you devote the next week or two to doing these things and learning as fast as you possibly can. I don't think, honestly, a week's enough, but I think taking this activity, this process, and devoting and staying committed for at least a certain amount of time, like a week, is going to be better than trying it here and there or wherever, because you're not going to really learn much, and you're not going to learn that much at all quickly either. But devoting yourself, committing yourself, and allocating that time to really focus on that activity and how you can improve it the best you can, I think is going to be one of the best things that you can do. Now, if you have a team, then have devote a couple people or a person to just do that and see what they learn, and really tackle it. And what I mean is, like, here's one example. If you're only doing one post a day on TikTok, for example, and then let's say you learn how much time, energy, and effort it took to make that one post. But let's say you develop a process in doing so, or you found out, like, hey, I could talk about 2 things, cut the video in half, and now I have 2 videos, right? Well, now you realize that you just doubled your efforts. You doubled the output with the same amount of effort. So now you could do potentially 2 videos a day, or you can stretch that time frame for 1 video a day for 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. This is just a very simple, basic example. But my point being is, if you could just simply find creative ways within your process to then potentially double the output and make your process more effective and everything, then that is just, all you did was like change the way you did something very slightly, and now you are creating more output, and that extra output could actually potentially create a means to learn double in terms of learning faster, right? And that's what I think a lot of people might miss out on, is looking at things from that perspective, looking at things in a way where they could really maximize their efforts, especially from the organic thing. So, and that's why I say it's important to have those processes and things like that, because the second that you start looking at things a little bit creatively, like, hey, look, I just covered all this content. I made it really a big, huge video that, like, let's say you're doing a vlog, and I made this big video that, like, I broke it into the sections, like, you know how in YouTube you can click on each section so you can get to the one, it's user-friendly, more user-friendly. Well, instead of just putting that big, huge piece of content out there, you could splice it up, and boom, you have, like, I don't know, 5, 10, whatever pieces of content. And now you just were that much more effective with the that whole process. So, and that's what I'm trying to say here is there's just a way you could do to really being focused with that and understanding, and just by allocating that time, that undisrupted, I guess, within reason, because there's always distractions, right? But create that means where you're in that environment where you can really focus on these things is just going to be that much better and helpful in how you do things, and how you can potentially feel a little bit more confident about what you're doing, and at least know that you tried things out and in a way that wasn't just like mediocre, or like, oh, I did a post here one day, I did another post here the next week, because that's not really going to tell you too much or indicate too much to you. In most cases, I wouldn't say every. Sometimes you could post something and for whatever reason it goes viral, and if that's the case, well, that's another way of learning fast. But a majority of the times, you might not post something for a while until it goes viral, because it's usually a buildup that occurs. It's not just instantaneous all the time that you post. We all know that. But we, in the back of our minds, or even the front of our minds, we're just hoping that's going to be the case. But again, having that process, and those are a good ways and how you learn. And a lot of it comes down to just staying committed and just taking lots of action. And again, if you're being smart with your process, it might actually require less action. It's just a matter of how you're distributing that. All right. Now, the other way is paid. And when you're using paid, money has a great way of making things happen a lot faster, right? And that's why we all are looking for funding and everything else. But that aside, what's really good too is if you do have a budget and you do have means to certain things, look at it, paid strategies as a means to learn. Because here's the thing. I'm trying to remember. I think it was episode 254 where I was talking about like how to approach ads and stuff. And along those lines, within that context, I was mentioning like, hey, you should only really doing paid ads if you're, for example, only doing paid ads if you are getting a return, right? Well, instead of a return on your investment for paid, especially in these early stages, what you're really looking for is your investment is a learning experience, learning what works. And the reason why I like ads so much in this case is because you can put money towards a campaign. Let's say it's Facebook. You can have a lot of control with that in terms of what you set for the budget, what you set for your audience, what you set for the ad copy, like everything. You have the control there, which is great. And then you put it out there. And then what happens is kind of like what I was sharing with the marketing gold and looking at reviews and things like that. You can have people that comment on the ads, or based off of other metrics in terms of like engagements and things like that. You now are starting to get real data in terms of how people are reacting to this information that you're putting out there. And let's say you start with $5 a day. That's going to be more information that you can probably get, unless you're obviously going the organic route and taking lots of action and staying committed to it. That could be very quickly that you're getting a lot more information. And then, but let's say you double that, $5 to $10 a day. Well, now you're doubling the amount of that information that you're getting. So it's another way to get lots of information and to learn very quickly with something like paid ads. Same applies to other things too, right? Events. So what I would say is with events, like, you have Steam Fest and all the other Steam events, and then you have like physical events and virtual, all these events and stuff. But the great thing about that is events, they have been known, at least not all of them, but a good portion, a good number of them, or a certain amount, number of them, is great to go because the intent is there. When there's events happening, players that are attending the events have the intent usually to take some type of action, whether it's downloaded the demo to find out more. They're really curious because at some point in time, they want to find something new and exciting that they want to add to their library, essentially, right? So the intent's there, and that's what's really great about events. And in terms of impact, there have been some that have generated tons of exposure for other people and generated tons of other results in the form of like wish lists or purchases or whatever the case may be. Going back to ads real quick, as I kind of mentioned, they give you a level of control and that you can learn real quick. For events, they give you an opportunity to go to something that is driven by intent, which is really cool. And based off that intent, that can give you some quick information too, as one, was the event effective? And then if you compare it to other developers or studios and they were doing really well and you weren't, and let's say your game is very similar to theirs, that can actually give you some other information in terms of, okay, why did I miss the mark but they didn't, right? And kind of start evaluating that way. Another one too is influencers. And I would say with influencers, that's along the lines of kind of like relevancy and some control in terms of paid. And also some, level of exposure. I mean, all these things relate to exposure, right? But for influencers, it's interesting because one, it really comes down to, I say most ideally, is leveraging influencers that are really cater to your style of game or indies or whatever. Because the ones that are all over the place, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, just they're generalist influencers or broad, that might not be as effective. Even if they have a super high reach, in the end, it might not be as impactful as you might think it would be. So just be mindful of that if you're considering to spend money on influencers for that. So that's why I say relevancy, because the ones that really are specific to a certain type of genre are going to probably be more impactful. But the other thing is you get some level of control too, not necessarily in terms of what to expect for results from them, because it can always vary. But what's really cool is typically when you're paying for influencers, you get some level of control in terms of like when that content goes live. And now pairing that up with other strategies that you're doing, other campaigns, or let's say you have an event going on, any number of other things, that can be pretty powerful because in conjunction with each other can amplify things. But again, with paid, usually when you have funds to put into paid activities, the exposure and everything else can be much greater compared to organic. Organic typically requires more investment on time, but then it can gradually build up. Whereas paid efforts, they're basically, you get more exposure right up front, but the second that event's done or you're done paying, there's not too much that can happen after that. Like the second your Facebook ads stop, that's it. You're not getting any more traffic from that, and that could die, right then and there. Influencers can be a little bit different because, especially like for YouTubers, for example, that are primarily putting video content up there that stays there for a long time. There's obviously a long tail, or the traffic dies down over time, depending on who the influencer is and stuff. But the point being is that's staying up there forever. So if you have a lot of coverage from different influencers, whether it's organic or not, that content can build up. Whereas if it's primarily a Twitch streamer and they're not saving that video content, that's not going to have the same type of impact, for example. But again, it varies depending on what your strategy is and everything else. So ultimately, when you're doing this type of activity, when you're trying to learn fast, what are you looking for? And I would say first and foremost, it's basically what your bottom line activity is. So when you're learning something fast, it's one thing that I think shouldn't be the most important, but definitely the thing you should be really looking at too. So what I mean by that is, what's your bottom line? Well, what's your key metric? What's your most important result that you're looking for? And it could be wish lists, it could be sales, it could be anything along those lines. Email signups, probably not as high priority, but that could be one. Followers is another one. But the one that stands out more than anything is wish lists. So if you're doing an organic strategy or a paid strategy, I'd be looking for wish lists. But here's the thing. With paid, I would probably be looking a little bit more closely to what your main metric is or what your main result is with paid to see, okay, what is the result that I'm getting right away? Because with paid, like I said, you still want to be mindful of your return on investment. What's your return on ad spend type stuff? You want to look at it from those perspectives. Because if you're not, then you're just going to be foolish in that. And again, those methods should be able to provide you quick deliverable insight in terms of, hey, is this working well or not? And again, keep an open mind. Like, quick example here is I had a client that was running their own Facebook ads for a while, and in doing so, they're like, hey, look, I think there's a lot more potential here that we could have, and we just haven't been, we've maybe just been scratching the surface. We don't know it as much or whatever. So then they worked with me and they found out, oh yeah, there definitely was a lot more potential here. So that's one way to look at things too. So it's important to kind of look at things with an open mind in that sense, and how you can maybe improve and things. And that's, again, why I say that having that process in place, whether you developed it or someone else did, and being strategic with it is important to have. Because if you're not looking at all your activities and then going back and being like, hey, how can we improve this? How can we do these types of things? Then it's going to be a challenge to see where you can improve. But also, you don't want to write off something if it still is a good fit and has lots of potential for your game. That's what I don't want to see people do. And I think in a lot of cases, people do it all the time because they're like, I tried that, didn't work for me. And they move on. And they might not really know that, hey, that could be the thing that works really well for me. We don't want that to happen. But again, going back, when you're learning fast, I would say look at your bottom line, especially if it's a paid campaign or strategy that you're using. Now, organic, I wouldn't look at your bottom line so closely, at least right away. Because as I said, organic is one of those things, all those organic activities, is something that can like kind of build up in time. And it also depends on the frequency. And that's why I say that learning fast with an organic method really requires you to stay fully committed. And I'm not saying forever. If you can for like a long time, even if you're giving only 50% of your effort and the other 50% to the development, it's really good because those efforts build up in time. And that's what you want to see. And you're looking for not just wish list activity, but how are things improving and stuff over time. And it's really essential that you look at those things regularly, because especially if you're taking the effort to spend a good amount of time on creating organic awareness. Because if you're not, and you're just doing things here and there, and then you're like, hey, look, I got this huge spike in activity, and you're really trying to analyze it, but you may not know that for whatever reason that could have developed because you were committed for all this time, and it might not have just been that single post that was like, yeah, your single post could have developed a lot of that virality or whatever, but it could have been simply the efforts from all the other work you've done up to that point. So if you're only looking at things with the laser focus thing when something does really well, that's great, and it's another way to learn. But if you're not doing these other or looking at the other activities, you might be really missing out on how those are contributing too. And again, in terms of the context of this conversation here, it's putting in the effort and the commitment to go full in and to take as much action as possible. Because if you're only taking a month to do this, let's say if you took a month of activity that you're really doing your marketing on an organic level, and then you stretch that out, you take that same, let's say, however posts, let's say you did 30 posts in 1 month. Sounds crazy, I'm sure. But let's just say that's the activity you did. But now you spread that over a year. If you could take everything that you learned in that 30 days and look back and be like, all right, I got a lot of information here. I'm going to reassess and be like, I didn't even think that people would care about this feature as much as they did. I thought it was like totally mediocre and no one would really care about it. But that's a thing that people love and want. Wouldn't you want to know that information in a month opposed to a year later? think of all the work that could be done in a whole entire year. And that's exactly my point with this. And it might sound hard to make that type of commitment with some of these activities and stuff, but that's what you are potentially missing out on. And that's why it's important to really learn fast and important to look at these types of things, or look at your bottom line when you're doing these activities, or just be aware too of like what the type of engagement and other things are too, because again, that's why all of this is important. Because if you're not looking at things in these different ways, or how to approach it in a manner that you can effectively say, hey, look, I got as much as I possibly can, and now I know for certain what's a good way to approach it. Do we need help with it down the road because we know it still has potential? Can we be doing more of this activity and focus more on this activity when we're in a better position that we can? Like, that's the position I want all of you to be in. I don't want it to be in like, oh, I heard this did really well, and now I'm going to try it out and just boom, throw it out there and be like, I guess it didn't work. Like that, honestly, that's really the position that I want all of you to be in, is one where you're not like, hey, that looks good. More of, I know that's good. And either I'm going to do more of it when it's right for us, or I know that I have to be committed to it now and until we release, or I want you to know. I want you to be in the know with these activities. I don't want you to be guessing. Is what it comes down to, and why I'm having this conversation with you, and why I thought it was so important for me to jump on solo here to share this with you. So that is pretty much it in terms of what I wanted to share with you today, and the importance of, learning fast with your marketing. And again, it's not to be hasteful. It's not to be hasty and not smart with what you're trying to do and everything. It's more along the lines of taking some time, being committed with it, and then really looking at things with an open mind, but also a clear understanding of what your goals are with these types of activities that you want to find more of. And I honestly not just think, but know that taking this type of initiative with some of your marketing activities and approaching it this way is going to be more fruitful and more impactful, but also give you more confidence in what you're doing, and also not putting yourself in a position where you're writing something off that could be very helpful for creating awareness for your game. All right. Well, I really hope that you got a lot out of this and you think a little bit differently when it comes time to knowing that you got to put a little bit more energy into your marketing. Again, I know everybody's situation is relative and there's a lot of factors at play and stuff, but next time it comes around to thinking about what type of things you should be doing or how you should approaching them, I love you to kind of like think with, hey, let's do this fast mentality type of activity, because by learning faster, you're going to really help yourself out that much more than if you decide to go at it very slowly. So again, I hope you got a lot out of this. Really appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.